everybody. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's broadcast on behalf of the Foundation of Laguna Woods Village. Today's broadcast is part of a series we're doing on planning for the inevitable. And this is the fifth broadcast in this series, which looks at different aspects of this overall topic. Today, we're looking at an offshoot of an earlier broadcast on estate planning. And it has to do with planning for the possibility of becoming incapacitated. And if you should become incapacitated, how you can protect yourself in advance. I'm sure many in the audience are familiar with the foundation. We are the local village charity, and our primary function is to step in and help residents with temporary emergency financial assistance when they encounter a financial hardships. In recent years, we've broadened our focus, and now we have undertaken projects which seek to improve the quality of life in the village. Most recently, we are offering fall prevention classes in cooperation with Memorial Care Saddleback Hospital, and we are also renting emergency response devices for residents who are at risk of falling. In fact, in the past 2 weeks, we actually saved a life with one of those devices. When we talk about planning for the inevitable, what we're really talking about are decisions that we should face before it's too late. But for whatever reasons, we seem to avoid them, to put them off. The issue of planning for the possibility of incapacity is very real to me. I am Marcy Scheinwald, the president of the foundation, and I encountered this issue head on when my parents were seriously injured in an automobile accident. Protecting the rights, the interests, the property, the health care of those who can no longer communicate on their own is crucial. And to explore this issue with me today, I have enlisted the help of a local elder law attorney, Faye Blix. She has an office right in the Laguna Hills City Hall. She has been an elder law attorney since 1984, and she founded the elder law section of the Orange County Bar Association. Good morning, Faye.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you.
As I was riding over here today, I thought of a problem or an issue that can happen right here in the village. Okay. Because we have a basically elderly population that lives here. And I was wondering if you were somebody who suddenly found that you were responsible for somebody who suffered a serious stroke and became incapacitated. What should you know? What should you do?
Yeah, that's a really tough position to be in, and why it's important to plan, because if you're suddenly plunked into somebody's living room and you are not able to pick that person's brain, the first thing you want to look for is, are there documents? You know, did they plan? What are their prescriptions? Which doctors are they working with? And to not have any kind of guidance and suddenly be stuck in that position is really tough. So I think for most of us, if you think ahead and you kind of say, okay, if that happened to me, what would I want people to know? So it's kind of a good springboard for planning. And it can be as simple as where to turn the water off, or or, what is this pill for?
I don't know where to turn the water off, so that would be a problem.
Okay. But, and even little things like the story behind the picture in the library. I mean, there are all kinds of things.
Okay, so let me flip the question.
Okay.
I'm the resident. How do I plan for the possibility that I could be that incapacitated person, that I could be the person who had the stroke and couldn't communicate?
Right. I think that so many of us focus on what happens after we die. But the truth of the matter is about 90% of us are going to experience some level of incapacity. It might be temporary. For some, it might be a diagnosis like Alzheimer's disease. And so I have clients that kind of joke about it. And they'll say things like, oh, just treat me like the Eskimos, put me out on an ice floe, or, take me, shoot me behind the barn. Well, those are funny, but they're not practical. It's not going to happen. And so I think it's important for us to take control. We always think of it taking away control, but actually planning for incapacity is taking control and saying now, while all pistons are running, who I want to be my substitute decision maker in the event I'm not able to make those decisions for myself. What guidelines do I want them to follow? And if for
Well, how does somebody do that?
Okay. So it doesn't happen just by saying it's going to happen. Like if you say, I want my daughter to be in charge, that's not going to help if she goes down to the bank and says, Mom wanted me to be in charge. There needs to be an official document. And when you think about life, we're really dealing with kind of two parallel pathways. We're dealing with healthcare, personal kinds of decisions, and financial kinds of decisions.
Let's talk about financial first.
Okay.
We'll deal with healthcare later.
Okay. So right now, if you think about it, what are the things that require your signature? And if suddenly you could no longer sign, what is your plan? And so it'll be different for different people because we all own different things. But the bottom line is, if you have not planned ahead of time, after you become incapacitated, it's too late because you don't understand what the paperwork says. So that's why it's so important to plan ahead. And many of your audience probably has living trusts.
Yes.
And as part of the living trust, there is a component that is a plan for incapacity, so that in the event you're not able to manage for yourself, usually then the successor trustee takes over. Depending on what your trust says, it might be one doctor, two doctors, or occasionally I have Christian Science people who don't want doctors at all, and it might be a disability panel. But that's great, but it only deals with the assets that are in the name of the trust. And there are a lot of decisions that have nothing to do with your trust. Just simple things like canceling a cell phone, signing an income tax return, calling an insurance company to see if some procedure is covered. And so you want to have what's called a durable power of attorney.
That was going to be my next question.
Okay.
I hear that term, durable power of attorney, tossed around.
Right.
But I'm not sure everybody understands what that is or how it works.
Right. So a regular power of attorney or a general power of attorney is good for short-term specific things. Say I'm going to Switzerland and escrow is closing and I want my brother to sign the escrow papers for me. Okay, that power of attorney would be good for that as long as I still had capacity. As soon as incapacity occurs, a general power of attorney no longer has authority. So for most of us, we need something called a durable power of attorney. It means it endures incapacity. It remains effective even if I'm incapacitated. And almost all of us, I mean, the generals are helpful for little things, but for the most part, when we really need the power of attorney is when we can no longer do things for ourselves.
All right, at what point do you execute?
I would recommend that we execute as soon as possible. In other words, we don't know what our future is. We could be hit by a bus tomorrow. We could fall and have a stroke. We could develop Alzheimer's disease. A lot of the accidents occur for young kids, I mean, you know, that are over 18. So I really think it's a good idea for it to be one of the first documents that, legal documents that people do. You can always redo it, and I recommend that you keep the papers with your tax papers so that you sort of take a look at it every year. Are these still the people you want? Is there anything else that I...
Does it have to be one person, or can it be more than one person?
It can be more than one, but if you appoint you want to make sure that they get along and they're able to come to some kind of resolution as to one path. So for the most part, whenever you involve more than one person, you have more potential for conflict. Now, you definitely, I think, should name alternates, because we have no guarantees that the first person we choose is still going to be around. Particularly with spouses, a lot of times you're sort of the same age, sometimes same frailties.
Okay, so you would need to consult an attorney.
It's probably best, I mean, I know that sounds self-serving for an attorney, but it's probably best to consult an attorney, but not absolutely necessary. There are forms that can be downloaded. I recommend that if you have, say, IRAs at Morgan Stanley or a bank, I think it's good for you to sign their own individual power of attorney, because they've already approved it. It fits in their drawers, you know, and you then have the security that it's not going to be held hostage until their legal department checks your power of attorney.
Okay, usually, from what you're saying, it involves a family person.
It usually does, but sometimes...
because that was my concern. I mean, I live in Laguna Woods. I know there are a lot of people who live alone. I live alone. And what if you don't have local family, or if you don't have family at all? How can you take care of this issue?
Right. So the first point is local isn't absolutely necessary. It's better, but in this day and age of DocuSign and Zoom and all the rest of it, sometimes if the person you trust is not close geographically, they can still serve. It may not be ideal. But for many of my clients, they have no one. That's one of the reasons why they moved to Laguna Woods, because it's a secure area. So they should be familiar with a profession called a private professional fiduciary. And these are people who do this for a living. They're kind of hired daughters or hired sons in a way. I mean, they're very professional in many ways. But I suggest, you know, interview a few of those, see if you feel good about them. And if you feel comfortable with them, then they are the people you can write into your documents. And they are, you know, held to a fiduciary standard. And so I think it beats not having anybody, because if you don't plan and something happens, you're left at the mercy of whoever steps forward, and probably involves the courts.
How does somebody go about finding a private fiduciary?
Okay. Probably word of mouth is the best, maybe checking with Laguna Woods Social Services, but also there is a private professional fiduciary association for California, and if you Google pfacca.org, what you can do is enter your zip code, and then you will see the various fiduciaries that service this particular geographic area. Some of them don't do everything. You know, some of them may not want to do healthcare, but they may want to do finances.
Okay.
But for the most part, you'll find a lot of the same names surfacing. They have good
Okay.
reputations.
Now,
Yeah.
we're talking about the things that people can do
Yes.
to protect themselves, to protect their assets. What's the worst case scenario? What if somebody, unfortunately, has not taken these steps and they are incapacitated? What happens?
Right. So,
And they have no family
Right.
to step in.
so I'll give you an example of a very vibrant 83-year-old who was very sharp, relatively wealthy, no family, kind of a control freak, but she suddenly had a massive stroke. It didn't kill her, but now everything comes to a screeching halt. Nobody can write checks to pay for her care. Nobody's there to assess what procedures need to be done health-wise. And so in that particular situation, we had to have the public guardian come in and file a conservatorship over her. And again, I'm glad conservatorship is there, but what it really involves is petitioning the court for somebody to take over your life, basically give the keys of your life to that person.
And who is that person? What is that person?
Okay, so it usually, if there's no friend or no family that takes over, it often can just be the public administrator, the public guardian, or it might be a relative, 3 generations removed, the person you absolutely didn't want involved in your life.
Or really doesn't know you,
Right,
which is a problem.
And so that's why I'm saying people get worried about control, but really planning is taking control. It's saying who I want in the event this happens to me, and these are the guidelines I want that person to follow. Because otherwise, you're sort of at the mercy, and we all think, oh, it's never going to happen to me, but it does. I even have an attorney friend who did this for a living and somehow got dementia and got paranoid about her sister and took her sister off of all the documents, and now we're going to have to do conservatorship.
Okay, so we've talked first about financial control, and essentially what you're suggesting is that having a durable power of attorney is critical. And so the first task, I would think, is who you want to give that control to, and then taking the steps to having it executed either with your attorney or, as you suggested, perhaps with your financial institution. Let's switch over to the issue of health care now. When we talked about the person who becomes incapacitated because of a stroke, I was thinking of a person, for example, and I know of a situation where somebody had a stroke and lost the ability to swallow. And as a result of the dysphagia, making sure that they were fed became a significant issue.
Right.
And the question became, for the family, did they put in a feeding tube? Did they do it a nasogastric tube? Did they do it directly into the stomach? I mean, there were a host of medical issues that had to be considered. How do we ensure that our health care wishes are followed if we become incapacitated?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to completely ensure because we don't know what the future is. But I think the main thing is to be fairly specific in your conversations with your family and your agents so they have a sense of what your values are. And there may be certain things, like a stroke is a perfect example, where sometimes having a feeding tube for a few weeks or a few months can jumpstart that person back to normalcy. In other situations, the stroke is so traumatic that essentially the person is almost brain dead, and to keep them alive on a feeding tube may not be useful. So I think it involves stating what your values are, trying to be as specific as possible, but still allowing leeway. And a lot of that is part of the document, so at least that person has official
All right,
authority.
you talk about another document.
Right.
We have a durable power of attorney. What else do we need?
So for healthcare, you need something called an advance directive. And if you listen to the words, what you're saying is you are directing in advance who you want to make your healthcare decisions and what guidelines you want to follow. And because we cannot predict what is always going to happen to us, it's important for us to not be so specific. Like I've had one situation where somebody said, absolutely under no circumstances do I ever want any tubes. Okay, well, she got a bad flu and completely dehydrated. And when she went into the hospital, they were going to intubate, put intravenous
IV
nutrition, and not nutrition, but just saline. And the agent was concerned that they were going against that person's wishes by allowing it. And so that's an example of probably being too specific. So you want it to express more your general values, that if I can't recognize people, or I don't want to just be kept alive if I'm not able to communicate, those kinds of things.
Okay, if I don't have an advance directive yet, how do I go about making one or having one?
Sure. Certainly, if you go to an attorney for an estate plan, the estate plan should involve all of that. The living trust, the will, the durable power of attorney advance directive. But if you wish to avoid the legal profession, usually the advance directives are one of the most common documents that can be downloaded. Sometimes your doctor might have a copy. You may be able to pick one up at the senior center. So the forms are definitely available.
Is that the same thing as a healthcare proxy? Because that term is bandied about also.
Right. Healthcare proxy is used often in states other than California, but it is essentially the same thing. If you think about the advance directive as an umbrella term, and there are different kinds of advance directives, I think the most common and the best one is a healthcare power of attorney, because it allows you to state what your wishes are and name an agent.
Okay. Faye, talking about these two things, taking care of our finances, taking care of our health, are there some things other than we've already discussed that people can do today to get themselves underway?
I mean, certainly executing the documents is important, but I think if you can look at your life and ask yourself the question, what would they need to know if I were no longer here? So with healthcare, make sure you have a list of your prescriptions. Make sure you have a list of your doctors. What are you taking the prescriptions for? Where's your insurance, health insurance papers? So the more organized you can get about those kind of documents. The same with finances. If I think it's not a bad idea to have a budget. So if somebody comes in and sees that your checks are beyond what your budget is, what is happening, what bank accounts have closed, who's on the bank accounts, do you have beneficiaries named on all of your life insurance and IRAs? But organization can make a huge difference for the family. Get as much as possible automatic. So have direct deposit, pay your bills automatically. Because under those kinds of circumstances, it's less likely that somebody has to take over because you've already kind of put yourself on pilot.
Is there anything related to this subject that I haven't asked about that you would like to add?
I think you've really done a good job of covering the ground. I think the important thing is for people to understand that doing these documents doesn't mean you're going to become incapacitated right away. I have people so often express, that's taking control away from me. and to reframe it and think, this is really a way for me to say what's going to happen with my life. Because I don't know about you, I'm more afraid of incapacity than I am of dying. If I'm dead, I'm dead, you know? But when my marbles are starting to loosen a little, I want to make sure somebody I love and trust is in charge.
Is that the most important thing that you want to leave the audience with?
I think so. Don't be afraid of it, and do it now. You can always change it. But it is such a gift of love to those who are important to you. You don't want to make it harder for them. You want to make it easier for them, and by making it easier for them, it's easier for yourself. And you can set up guidelines so they don't take over the, you know, when you think about it, it's kind of the Visa card of your life. So you can set up guidelines. You can keep the power of attorney in escrow until it's needed. You can ask for an accounting to be given to another person. You know, there are different ways in which you can set up controls. It can be very custom.
What is the most frequent question you get asked about this subject?
I think probably people assume that diagnosis alone equals incapacity. So they'll say, Mom has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I guess it's too late to plan. And it isn't always, because capacity is not set in stone. It's not a fine line. It's capacity to do what? So Mom may not be able to drive anymore, but she might still be able to say who she wants to be in charge of her health care.
Does, you talk about capacity. Does California have a legal definition of incapacity?
Well, it does to a certain extent, but it's capacity to do what? So capacity for marriage, for instance, is very low. My law school professor said it's a little better than a broccoli. Okay. Where capacity to do a living trust is more, do you understand all the consequences? It's more like capacity to sign a contract. So much depends on the whole thing. But essentially we're talking about, is the person able to communicate their decision? Is their decision based on understanding and appreciating the consequences, the risks, the benefits? It's kind of that global sense. But diagnosis and also eccentricity is not enough. I mean, some people, I had a client who said about his sister, Franny's always been silly, you know.
Okay, so I think what you're leaving us with is a message that by taking control, we are in control.
Exactly.
And that incapacity, while it's something that we all may confront, there are ways to deal with it ahead of time. I want to thank you very much today for sharing your expertise with our audience, because I think what you did is dispel some concerns and make people more comfortable with what they need to do to plan to protect themselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I certainly hope so. Thank you. Okay.